Hello there. My name is David Oyena, and today we're going to look at basic tips on how to effectively lead and manage volunteer teams in non-profit and faith-based organizations. To begin with, let us try to look at the impact and the scope of volunteerism in the world today. According to the UN volunteer website, our global estimates for volunteers stand at 970 million. This is an equivalent of 125 million full time workers. And the economic impact of this is 1.340 trillion US dollars, or 2.5% of the global economy. The majority of volunteers are obviously in non-profits and faith-based organizations like churches. For instance, I come from a church where volunteers account for about between 90 and 95% of the workforce. So making the issue of volunteers quite interesting to deal with. So what's the case for effective volunteer management? Why am I talking about effective volunteer management today? Effective volunteer management relates to organizational success. In other words, if you manage volunteers effectively, the organization will win or will succeed. Secondly, a unique set of skills is required to effectively manage volunteers. Volunteers are obviously very different from full time workers for the mere fact that they are not paid. So that means they depend so much on their intrinsic value. You have to motivate them intrinsically. Then, thirdly, volunteers are also the face of volunteer run organization. If they are the face of volunteer run organizations. According to Bell and Bell Elkins 2005, volunteers often feel that they are untouched by organizational rules and regulation merely because they are not paid. And this is very important because even if they are not paid, they are still the face of the organization. So that's why I'm putting forward the case for effective volunteer management. So what are the tips that are required to effectively manage volunteers? Effectively managing volunteers requires a leader to be relational. This is something that kept popping up in most of the conversations that I had with volunteer team leaders in different organizations. That volunteer leaders need to be relational in order to effectively manage volunteers. This means showing concern for volunteers beyond their work. You value them beyond their work, checking on them even after work, and valuing them for the human beings that they are. Then also leadership behaviors like social intelligence and emotional intelligence are quite important when dealing with volunteers. Our leaders need to understand and acknowledge that their actions and their words have an effect on volunteers, and they shouldn't allow their emotions to get the better of them. Simon Sinek advocates for the creation of a high trust environment. This is simply an environment where volunteers feel cared for, loved, and appreciated. Such an environment will cause people to gel together in unity and give their best in service. So volunteer leaders need to be relational. And relationality also correlates with Bollerman and Dill's human resource frame, which advocates for a concern for the people or followers in an organization. It advocates for an investment in volunteers, treating workers well in an organization. Then, secondly, to effectively manage volunteers, you need to have clear goals and expectations. According to Bowman and Deal 2014, good structure creates happy workers. Sometimes when leaders face problems in organizations, they are fast to blame the people of an organization. But sometimes it's usually the structure that is the problem. So mere adjustments, clarity in the structure is very important when it comes to managing volunteers. And there's also a need to ensure that there's a good alignment between volunteer motives and their workers. The Olivier 2008 advocates for a connection between the passions and what volunteers love to do with the work that they are given. Making sure that this alignment is there is very, very important in effective volunteer management. Then there also has to be a balance between goals and relationships. So pursuing goals alone is not effective